you had a media gag order. Really?
Yeah. hmm
Cool.
Yeah. Basically, we were told that before we respond to any media, we need to direct it to the central media office to make sure that we are experts on the thing that we've been contacted about, that we have the
Huh.
appropriate meaning and training, and that we are representing Emory in a unified and strategic
Cool.
way across the
Cool.
institution. Yep.
Do you want me to
So
black
we
out your affiliation or cut out the thing where I said you're from Emory at all?
Nope,
Okay.
nope, nope.
This is Audiomunity, a podcast about our body's never-ending fight with the outside world.
Hello, everyone. This is Audiomunity, recorded on June 26th, 2026. This is episode 56. I'm Kevin Bonham from Tufts Medical Center, joined, as always, by Matt Woodruff.
Hey, y'all.
Hello, Matt. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Doing good. I'm just a little bit irritated that our recording studio, our recording platform, Riverside, apparently has decided they want to get all of the tracking information, and I wasn't able to record until I shut off my privacy settings that
Right.
have always
Yeah.
worked before.
Right.
But, you know,
Yeah.
I don't mind being tracked because we don't live in a dystopian hellscape in the United States,
Yeah, and I will.
and everything's fine.
It's all good. No, I came in today fully ready to unload, so that was actually the perfect start to this episode. Is that in order to record this and get this to you all, we must be government tracked.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, to
that's
be fair,
cool.
Matt, we don't know that it's the government that's
Right.
forcing Riverside to do this. All we know
Right.
is that if we want to do science communication, we need to make sure we have minimal privacy as scientists because reasons,
Yeah.
is my understanding.
Right. Right. No, and that kind of thing definitely won't be uploaded into a large database that's
Right.
then
Crawled by AI and used
crawled
to
by
reject
AI
the
and
grants that
used
we
in
just.
grant funding decisions, for example.
Speaking of grants,
Yes.
it is. Uh, People may have noticed that our last episode came out at the end of April. It is now the end of June. There are a few good reasons for that. The first is that grant deadlines were end of May, beginning of June, and now I have another one in coming up real soon in July.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Matt, you submitted an R01.
Sure did.
I submitted an R35, which is something called a MIRA. I submitted an R01 of my own. I was co-I on Matt's R01. I'm submitting an R21 renewal next week. All of these are grants from the NIH, National
Mhm.
Institutes of Health, which for the last 70, 80 years has been the primary funder of biomedical research in this country, and through ups and downs of funding have been exceptionally good at peer review and really like having rigorous review of grants. And we've kind of gotten into this a few times, what NIH actually does. We've talked about indirects. But for all of its flaws, and there are flaws in the grant review process, one thing that I think is not true, or I don't think it can be honestly said, that the grants that get funded are not meritorious. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. No, I would. And
There's
here's what
never
I would
enough
say.
money to go around. I would say the
No,
problem
there's
is that
not.
lots of meritorious grants don't get funded
Correct.
through this process.
Correct. Yeah. And it's hard to know that from the outside, right? Because the way that this is set up is you have, and I know that we've talked about this before, but let's make this a nice encompassed space to talk about all this,
Yeah,
because I think we
we'll be a
really
little
need to
didactic before
we
we
need to
get
get in this today. So we all write those grants, And they're not small things, right? Like when you submit a grant, the R01 that I submitted with Kevin on as a co-I is a grant for $2.5 million over 5 years, which is a lot of money. It's a lot of taxpayer dollars, and it was probably, I think, 130 to 150 page packet, and that packet contains a lot of different things. It contains really detailed scientific documents like the research strategy, and that's what we all think of. So this is like a 12-page document that has figures and arguments, and is going to sort of build the foundation of the work that you want to do over that 5 years with that money. There are summary documents that can be used for NIH officials to kind of peruse through and understand, how to categorize these things so that they can move them into review spaces that fit. There are public-facing documents, right? Research narratives that say, like, hey, here's 3 sentences on, what this grant roughly is for. Here's why you would do it, right? And these are things that you could go online today and search
Yeah,
through NIH's
NIH
database.
Reporter. If you Google
Yeah,
NIH Reporter, you get to go back and look at every single NIH grant that was funded. You don't get to look at the ones that weren't funded, right?
correct.
I
Correct.
think there's some statistics in terms of like how many were submitted in a particular time frame, but you don't necessarily see the details of those. But for everything that was funded, you get to look at who submitted it. So like Matt's name, if his got funded, his name is gonna be on there. All of the other co-Is that were on there, co-PIs. So my name would be on there as well if Matt's gets funded. As a co-investigator, I have a little slice. You see how much money went out. You see that summary statement that Matt wrote saying what the grant was about, where Matt is, like a bunch of details about where that money goes um, and why it was funded.
Yeah. And so, you do all this, you put together a budget, you put together a lot of NIH internal documents, right? All that goes out and it gets sent to the NIH, and you provide a recommendation on the kinds of people that you think are going to be capable of reviewing this grant, right? And that's really important. It's a really important step because we've talked about some of the really complicated stuff that goes on in immunology at this point, right? And this is just immunology. So we're talking about one small subdivision of the National Institute of Health, largely the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, right? Which is where I submit my grants to because it's the most relevant generally, right? So the NIAID, even within that, you're going to have people that are very comfortable in different organismal systems, right? You're going to have mouse people, you're going to have monkey people, you're going to have human people, you're going to have people that understand B cells really well, T cells really well, macrophages really well, microbiomes. You're going to have technological distinctions where you have people that understand deep sequencing, you have people that understand spatial transcriptomics, you understand, right, the traditional flow cytometry and ELISA and all those methods that we talk about all the time on this podcast.
Not to
All of
mention
those
host
things,
pathogen interactions, individual virus
all of it,
mechanisms, bacterial mechanisms.
all
Yeah,
of it. And we've talked about this before, but as you are marching down your PhD line and you get into your postdoc and you get into your actual appointment as a faculty member, right? What we are all doing, all of us, is finding a niche that we occupy, right? That niche is what keeps our labs funded. Your name gets tied to specific areas of research that people look to you as an expert, right? So when we say the field of immunology is advancing, what we mean is there are a group of people that call themselves immunologists who have all found spaces to take what they know and put them against specific questions and advance those questions forward, right? Now, like any other human being, we forget a lot of stuff that we used to know along that way, right? Like from the time that you are a graduate student to the time that you are finishing, defending your thesis, you've learned an enormous amount about your specific project, and I guarantee you don't know the basics of what you were taught in your entry-level immunology class. Now, you know enough to go back and remember vaguely like how to readdress, how to refamiliarize yourself with that information. We're all human beings, and you subspecialize so far necessarily to drive what is now an incredibly advanced field forward that you don't have full breadth of immunologic expertise. Now, some of us that do coursework at the graduate school level, and so I'm the co-director of one of the courses here at Emory that serves as sort of the entry-level course for immunology for the graduate students. You refamiliarize yourself with some of that, but I will tell you, I come back to some of those lectures year after year, having to relearn what I wrote down, and then where I wanted to lead it, because I don't spend my days thinking about that level of detail anymore. Which means that when I submit a highly, highly technical R01 for $2.5 million of your tax dollars, right? There are a handful of people in the world that will really deeply understand that work, right? Now, there are a lot of people at the second tier that will be able to look at it like we do at these paper reviews, right? That will allow us to understand the impact, evaluate the data, right? And understand that for a short amount of time, right? Like you and I can credibly, critically review the papers that we review because we spend time thinking about it and we have the correct background in order to bridge that gap, right? Somebody with no familiarity with immunology cannot appropriately review one of our grants at this point. There's no way to bridge that gap without essentially feeding something into AI
Yeah,
and
and
getting a crappy answer on the back end.
I would say even more, like, it is not just that people that don't have PhDs in immunology, from fancy institutions can review this. Like, at this point, I would not be competent to review Matt's grant
Right. Yeah,
because
yeah.
Matt is the field that you are submitting in. Like, I have a piece of it. I'm doing a little computational bit that is to, do a certain kind of analysis that I'm an expert in. But like, I couldn't talk about the chemokines and cytokines in a way that's credible. I don't know the details of flow analysis well enough. I can look at a flow plot and say like, oh yeah, I see this cluster of cells, but I don't know the technical nitty gritty of, spectral flow and how many fluorophores I can credibly fit on a thing. So I couldn't evaluate the feasibility of your grant
Right.
as a reviewer.
And
And
right.
you
And
couldn't
so
review, if I was writing a grant about the, mucosal immunology of the gut microbiome host interaction stuff, like you couldn't credibly review that either because you don't know all of the nuances of sequencing of metagenomes and you don't know the technical problems with, human cell DNA and all that stuff. Like it's even more specialized than like immunology. It's like B cell development immunology. It's like vaccine
ex-
response immunology, gut micro. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's extremely, extremely specialized and complicated. Yeah.
Right. And so the way that this funding mechanism ultimately works is it's volunteer based, right? The reason that it's volunteer based is because the Academy, and we'll come back to the Academy later, the Academy has convinced all of us that as a part of getting tenure, as a part of becoming a full member of your institution, one of the things that you must do is you must serve the scientific community in a credible way, right? You must become a leader in that service. You won't get paid for that because none of us are paid for that. None of us are paid for the classes, right? We're paid to
Or
do the research.
another way to say
And
that,
yeah,
is that all of the stuff that we've talked about, like indirects and like all of the ways that this money flows through the ecosystem, there's an expectation built in that part of the scientific enterprise is not just like churning out profitable science. And that's part of the point is that like we we use a different mechanism than market forces to determine what is good science.
Sometimes.
And
Yeah.
right.
So,
So it's
so
compensated in another
yes,
way, in that our
it
part of our
is.
position, the expectation is that we are going to be reviewing.
Yeah. It,
Yeah.
reviewing grants, reviewing, right, donating our time essentially and our expertise to the continued success of this ecosystem, which involves grant review. Now, not everybody has time to review grants at all times, right? Some people are outside of the NIH process and international. Like it could well be that the three most important people in your field aren't even in the United States, right? Now, so when you submit that grant, realistically, you're not getting the people that can best evaluate it. You can't. It's impossible, right? It's a volunteer-based system, particularly focused on folks that are trying to advance their career in credible ways and use their contributions to that system to derive funding. I mean, that's really what's going on here, which means that we have to pull people into those study sections that are going to review grants that have a breadth of expertise. And so when your grant gets submitted and my grant gets submitted, a lot of time and effort is spent by the program officials at the NIH looking at the grant and asking the question, who can, within my stable of current volunteers, who can credibly review this work? And the answer that they're going to get back is not going to be perfect, because those 3 to 5 best people to review your grant don't exist in that volunteer pool. They simply don't, for the most part.
Well,
Right?
and like, to be perfectly frank, the best person to review your grant is yourself, because you're the only person that is the expert in all of the things that are going into your grant, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I agree
at
with
this
that.
stage of research,
Yeah, yeah,
the things are so specialized that, like, sometimes you have labs that are all directly competing on the exact same project, right? So like, you have a lot of scientists, especially like when we were in grad school, the checkpoint uh the immune checkpoint things like PD-1, PD-L1 and stuff. There were several labs that were researching that specific thing. They all kind of knew what the questions were. They were all asking the same questions, and they were like competing for fun. They had different angles and stuff like that.
sure, slightly.
But for the vast majority of science, that niche that Matt is talking about, we find that niche because we are the only ones that could credibly sit in that niche.
Yeah,
So you've got the people that are reviewing, even if there were like a perfect set, yeah, it would be the people that are actually writing the grant, which is
yeah, no,
obviously not
and
can't
to be
review.
fair, I don't think Kevin or I are arguing that there should be no scientific oversight, right? And it's
Of course not.
actually just the opposite. It's that the oversight needs to be as closely tied to the topic expertise as possible, because you lose nuances as soon as you get away from that very tight circle who's going to be, and that's okay at some level, right? At some level you want some outside perspective. I've seen the sort of circle jerk movement around certain fields where the same people review the same people's grants and like the same ideas get passed around. Not all of that is healthy, but you must keep the review of that grant in a space where people that are looking at it at least have the ability to comprehend the data and the ideas that are being presented. It's not going to be perfect. It already isn't perfect. And I will tell you the number of times that people have come to me and been like, I had great scores from reviewer 1 and 2. Reviewer 3 clearly didn't understand the grant as written, right? That is a common thing that happens, and grants get tanked because reviewer 3 clearly didn't have the expertise to look at the overall grant and the mechanism and say, oh, this is why it's different than the thing that I would think internally in my head, right? That happens all the time. And it
And
is,
another possible perspective on that is that the person writing the grant didn't pitch it in a
sure.
way that was comprehensible. And
Yeah,
we,
yeah, yeah.
as experts in a nitty-gritty little niche thing, we need to make sure that our science is understandable by the broader community. Otherwise, that science is useless. If I'm here writing stuff in a language that I invented that nobody can understand or interpret, that's
Yes.
not useful either. So to some degree,
Yes.
it has to be like, to do the work, you need to be specialized, but for the work to matter, it needs to be comprehensible.
Yes. Yes.
But it doesn't need to be comprehensible to non-experts, is I think
Right.
the point.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That doesn't mean that you reject that criticism and say, well, my grant was perfect and therefore, right, like this reviewer's an idiot. You take that criticism, you say, okay, well, we're clearly on the right track. We had two reviewers that understood this well. There were some clear criticisms and hangups from reviewer 3. So let's let's edit the grant. We will resubmit it. Let's think about whether this continues to be the right study section that we're targeting, like all of those things. It's an ongoing conversation. And this is literally what our job is, Kevin, right? This is what our job is. Our job is to write these things, to read the tea leaves around what's fundable and what's not, to take reviewer feedback, tweak our own programs, and try to project those programs into a space that is wildly competitive to begin with, right? And that process sometimes sucks, but it
Often
does
sucks.
get science, right? It does
Yeah.
get science. And there is a reason that the United States has been a leader in biomedical research for the last 50 years, right? Like this model, we didn't happen upon it. And we've talked about this in the past. This was a model that coming out of World War II, the United States said, hey, boy, it really seems important that we are on the front edge of this stuff. How do we build a system that allows us to be on the front edge? And this is what was come up with. And it has been a wild success. You know what
Yeah.
else was a wild success?
What's that,
The
Matt?
German academic model leading up to World War II.
True.
Where international people now come to the United States for training because this model allows for a relatively rigorous assessment of merit-based systems, right? Everyone comes here for their postdoc or their graduate work. And even in Europe, where they have relatively open but poorly funded systems, people come here first and then they go back. We should not pretend like that is set in stone. There's no reason, actually, for that to be that way, except that we put good policy in place coming out of World War II, right?
And lots of money behind it, to
And
be fair.
tons of money, and tons of money. So let's dig in to, for
Yeah,
a
so
second.
why are we talking about this, Matt?
Yeah.
What is good in science in 2026?
Yeah, the reason that we're talking about this is, and the reason that maybe you'll sense that I'm a little more fired up than I am, is we have been for the last year and a half talking about potential disruptions, ongoing disruptions into academic science in the United States. And we are now at a point where I think that we are at the final tipping point here. And we've been warning about it, and I think we've even called it a couple times. But we're at a place where we are actively reviewing whether or not grants can be fully pulled because political appointees of a hostile administration decide that the science is not worth doing or not in alignment with their agenda, right? There are some new
Or
rules.
I think that's the argument. But I think the truth is that the way that this is set up. I'm sorry. I should let you finish, and then I'm going to come
No,
back because I don't think it's sufficient to say that it's because they don't think the science is worth doing.
no,
Because
it's
we
it's
could argue
it's
about
not.
that. We could say, but what it really is, a new set of rules proposed by the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vogt, who's the administrator there. A new set of rules that says, A, we're not going to publish review like scores from peer review anymore. So at the moment, what happens is you have a set of people that review your grant. The top grant scores that have been read by 2 or 3 reviewers get advanced to the study section for the whole group to discuss, and then you get a sort of like aggregate score, and those scores are published. So we know how good a set of peer reviewers thought grants were in a numerical basis. So the first piece of the rule set is we're not going to publish those scores anymore. So you can't know how good individual grants were. Second, the career scientists at NIH, who Matt was talking about, these program officers that oversee peer review, or there's scientific review officers, SROs, that are sort of in charge of, not in terms of making decisions, but in terms of facilitating the peer review process, and then taking those numerical scores and sometimes making judgment calls on like this grant may be scored, like this grant scored 10th percentile. This other grant scored 12th percentile, but is more aligned with the direction the agency wants to go. So we're going to fund this very, very, very excellent grant over something that was very, 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 very excellent because it's a little bit more in line. So there were judgment calls that were made, but it's scientists and career grant officers making those choices. New rules say, no, the final vote lands with the political appointees that are put in by the administration, not the career review officers anymore. And there's a bunch of other stuff like, well, we can pull grants for any reason. We don't have to go through like
At any time.
At any
At
time.
any time. And so this is something that's come up over the course of the last year and a half, right? Lots of grants have been canceled. Universities that had their shit together filed lawsuits to get that money back. Many of those lawsuits won because you can't just cancel grants, right?
Yeah, grants
And
are contracts, right?
When we say they're contracts, they're government contracts. You can't just cancel them because you don't like what's being said. Now, we say grants, right? But grants sometimes translates to clinical trials. Grants sometimes translates to like actual public health interventions, right? So when we say can cancel grants at any time, what we're talking about is the potential to influence an ongoing health intervention with really good data behind it, right? So those lawsuits were successful because they were breaking their government contract. This rule essentially says that government contract does not exist, right? We're going to give you this grant, and then should we choose to stop it, we're going to stop it.
And
So
I want to say also, like, we call these grants, and they're commonly referred to as grants. And also, it's not as if they're sort of handing out money for people to do what they want with. You are proposing, what the NIH is saying, we want to fund X amount of science in this particular area. We're going to send out a call for essentially, proposals. It's like going out, if you're going to have folks bid on a construction project or something. The construction here is not a building, it's a body of knowledge. But it's still, the idea is we want to fund the construction of a structure of knowledge, and you're going to propose to me why you are the best person to do it. And then we are going to pay you to do the work that we want done. It's not just like, here's some free money, go do whatever you want. It's, we want this science to get accomplished. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes it's like, oh, government largesse, like they're giving the money, they should get to choose. Yes, and that's what we've been doing, but we've been choosing it based on meritorious review of grants by technical experts in that science.
Right.
They have been tasked with getting that the best science possible.
Yes, and let's not pretend that the government, up until this point, has had no control over the kinds of things that get funded, right? Let's not pretend like the scientific community wanders around aimlessly and does whatever the hell we want. That's not what happens. The NIH in the 80s and 90s decided that it was going to aggressively tackle HIV. And it has, by the way, aggressively tackled HIV. In the 90s, it decided to aggressively tackle cancer. And we have aggressively tackled cancer. Those are major foundational problems in society that have been, I don't want to say solved, but in some cases solved because of a few decades of direct investment. Did you see the new, the twice yearly HIV antiretroviral
Bonkers.
shot? Like
Bonkers.
that product has the potential to actually cure HIV. And I'm going to throw this out there. I went down a ChatGPT rabbit hole just to play out how much it would cost to cure HIV, because you can do this, right? By stopping transmission, you don't actually have to vaccinate people. What you have to do is you have to stop transmission in human populations. You can do that with that shot. A twice yearly shot is a reasonable thing to go global with and start proactively vaccinating people with, not vaccinating, treating people with. That costs less than $1 trillion. And so what I would suggest is that all of the folks that worked on Doge that cut out NIA, or not NIAID, the HIV prevention network in Africa, I know those folks have that money, right? Come be heroes and fund that kind of work, right? Because like we're now at a place where this kind of strategic investment, by offering money in these spaces that the government wants work done, right? That works. It's worked over and over and over again, right? You draw people because you and I both know that scientists are drawn to where the money is. We are
Of course.
willing to move our programs proactively in order to find funding streams that are stable for our labs and for our people. That's what we do, right? That's why we specialize into these niches. What they're doing now is not trying to align anything with forward-looking ideas about health. They have none of those. There are no forward-looking ideas, right? They have some vague ideas about the kinds of areas that they feel like are fundable in their mind, right? But what they're doing right now is destroying, right? They
Yeah,
don't
I
they don't want a realignment to their priorities. What they want is a destruction of alignment with any other priorities,
yeah, I
right?
mean, I think it's barely a fig leaf, but I think that the idea that this is about we don't like DEI, so we're going to defund, those things, which is what they were saying at the beginning of the administration. The vast majority of science that gets funded has nothing to do with those things. Like there's a couple of high profile stuff, but like has nothing to do with those. Even the stuff that more directly touches on the things we care about, like RFK's obsession with mRNA vaccines and destroying that field of study, which we've railed about before.
I'm going to rail
That's a
about it again
tiny
today.
fraction of the money that gets spent,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
on those specific things. But what this is, and the thing that kills me most is like the first paragraph of the proposed rule change is like, in order to advance transparency and improve blah blah. It's like, no, this is like the goal of this is to obscure the actual meritorious review and make sure that politicians get to choose who gets money and who doesn't. And if the goal were a goal that you and I would completely disagree with, which is to have much more top-down control over specific fields that get studied. We've just been talking about how we think experts should be doing the review. There are certainly problems with the review process and who gets funded. This addresses none of that. What this does is it puts a cloak over funding decisions to allow political appointees to make choices about who gets funded and who doesn't. And I think at this point, it's clear from across lots of different, pushes of this administration that the goal is power. The goal is getting to decide where government money gets spent in a political way rather than in a way that advances some, broader sense of the direction of the country.
Yeah. And
It's
so
for
you
it's for
asked the
cronyism,
question.
essentially. Like,
Yeah, and so you asked the question, like, why are we here today, right? Why are we talking about this today? And it is as simple as that. What you just talked about is the first step in the line of steps that takes a pre-World War II German academic institution and guts it from the inside out to align with a fascist regime. It's the same steps that took a Soviet system that was actually quite strong and moved it into cronyism and failed science and a loss of scientific merit, right? This is how you do that. It's how Turkey did it in 2016 when they essentially started gutting the academic institutions that started to push back on an increasingly authoritarian regime, right? Like this is the thing that people do when they are looking to fully pull control out of the academy and push it towards the government, right? It looks like a lot of things, and we talk about this from a science lens, right? But I'm going to pull it even farther. We're going to go a step farther today because I think it's time to do it. The science is one thing, right? The scientific voices are one thing. But the attack is actually an attack on the academy. This is one way to attack the academy, and it's particularly effective because the academy right now is tied to those NIH dollars because you and I are tied to those NIH dollars, and because we can be cowed by saying we're going to take your money unless you don't really talk about this stuff, right? That doesn't work so much on the philosophy side. It doesn't work on the mathematics side. It doesn't, because what you said is true. What we're talking about is a tiny fraction of what the academy actually does. But the academy now is, because of this enormously successful investment into biomedical and just general scientific research over the last 70 years, these institutions are now completely dependent on those dollars coming into their institutions. And so what happens is all the rest of those things, right? The philosophies, the maths, the ITs, like as silly as it sounds, all of that, the investigation into those spaces is now tied to those same dollars. And by cowing at the biomedical and NIH research level, what you gain is control over large institutions, right? So if you go back to Italy, as fascism was rising, right? One of the things that they did was they had everybody say a pledge, just an oath to the government, right? 1,200 people, 12,000, excuse me, 12,000 people required to recite that oath. You know how many didn't? 12. 12. It took 10 years after World War II for German universities to start talking about how disappointed they were in their own faculty and their own academic systems for failing to stop the rise of Nazism. Now, I am not saying that these systems always result in the same thing, right? Although I will tell you that building concentration warehouses just north of Atlanta is a pretty good sign of bad things. Now, granted, we were able to push back on that, which is wonderful. But what I am saying is that this thing that seems wonky that we're talking about in this one discrete space is not discrete at all. It's one part of a much larger system that's looking to cow academic institutional voices. And we are now at a point where I think we can credibly say that universities that are not seeing this as a whole, universities that are not pushing back on things like this OMB rules project, understanding full well what the underlying assumption is, we're getting to a point where those institutions are now complicit, right? And this is why I'm fired up today, right? Because we are now at a place where I am tired of pretending like carefully scrubbing our websites of DEI language and this kind of thing are disconnected from each other.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
I think there's a sense. So when this administration started, and we were just starting our season 2 of autoimmunity, And there were things like an executive order that was going to cut indirects down to 15%, right? Blatantly illegal. They were trying to do it anyway. And that's, as you were talking about before, like the courts could push back on that. Those were all essentially testing the boundaries of power. How much could they do, and flooding the zone, as they say, with stuff. People have been pushing back. It's slow. Going through the courts is a slow process, but the administration has lost on a lot of stuff. The problem is that now they're starting to come into the actual gears of government and starting to try to leverage things in the sort of like way it should be done. This is an OMB rule change. It's been open for about a month. It's going to be open, I think, until July 16th, maybe.
Mid-July. Yep, mid-July.
We'll put a link in the show description. And you should, if you haven't already, and even if you have already, go put in another comment describing why this is a bad idea. It's getting a fair amount of pickup. I've been seeing more and more politicians talking about this, which is good.
Yeah.
But the NIH, in terms of the overall size of the government, it's not a very large pot. But for any individual institution, it is an enormous amount of money that is at stake here. And the idea that this is about transparency is just obvious BS. It's like we're going to improve transparency by painting this clear glass window black. It's absurd. The idea that, well, we want to spread money around, because right now, a lot of money from NIH is going to places like Boston. A lot of money is going to places like California, where some of the best institutions of science in the country are located. There's a reason that California is a hub of innovation, partly because they have competed very successfully for grant dollars because they have invested in excellent institutions in science. And so now the idea is like, oh, well, we want to spread money from around the country, which I think, again, is like, on the face of it, is not a terrible idea. But it's clear that the goal is we want to punish blue states and we want to reward red states. Because they're not talking about taking money away from Texas, which also, by the way, has a ton of very excellent science, right? Like Baylor College of Medicine, UT, like all of these places, excellent science. They're not talking about, oh, we need to get more money away from Texas. They're talking about getting it away from Boston, from Massachusetts, from California, from Seattle, right? And it's just a blatant power grab. It's trying to use the levers of government to punish political enemies and reward political allies. It's the kind of thing that a court decision is not going to be able to easily overturn. And it's the kind of thing that's going to degrade science in a way that I'm not sure if it's recoverable in our country. I mean, they've already been doing that. And, you know, I obviously have some personal stake in this, but I think if we want the next 50 years of science if we want to advance in the US, we need to stop it. We need to block it.
No, it needs to, it can't. It can't. No, we're and I think, you know, there's always a lot of hand wringing. You know, I've been I'll get into some of the activism here. You know, I will fully admit that over the last year and a half, a significant portion of my headspace has been, you know, what do you do in an environment like that, both inside and outside of the academy, right? We've had tons of conversations with faculty members that are trying to understand like what to do, that are trying to understand, you know, how to push back, and it feels like these problems are out of reach for most of us. And I will say that, most people that I talk to have a very real and reasonable fear that they're going to be damaged institutionally if they are too loud, if their voices are sort of picked out from the group. Obviously, send a comment in, right, about this. I don't honestly think that he's going to give a damn. Now, if because this is all one guy, right?
Well,
Now,
yes and no, but they do have to respond
exactly. So
every
if
comment that gets written.
Yep. So the potential benefit here is that enough people sending these comments in gets congressional attention, and the executive, right, OMB still does report at some level to congressional mandates, right? Like, so there is reason to be submitting those comments. Don't let me discourage
the
you.
The downside of them going through the normal government process for them is that they have to go through the normal government process.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a reason they tried to do this with executive order to start with, and that it
Yes.
was getting blocked by the courts.
Right.
So now this is the harder thing, and it's a chance for us to actually push back.
Yes, and so do that. Do that. If you don't do anything else about this, please do that. And if you're listening to us, chances are good that you work in an institution. What is your institution doing about this? Right? Why is your institution not pushing back vocally against something like this, right? Knowing full well that it has the power to destroy the academic system, right? And the answer that you're going to find is money, right? It's that the money required to run a university is so high now that they're deathly afraid that they're going to lose all academic independence by pushing back in these spaces, right? That's what the lawsuits were for against Harvard and Columbia and, all of the places early on. And I will tell you that has worked. That government press into the academic space has worked. And the reason that you're not seeing pushback from these institutions is because they are now fearful. And I think it's on all of us now within these spaces to recognize where we sit within that system then, right? Because if the universities are no longer going to push back, they're no longer going to advocate in hopes that their academic independence will somehow outlast this government end run into power, that's not how this works.
And
it's not how this works. It's not how it's ever worked in these sorts of governmental systems. People convince themselves of this over and over and over again. And we're now at a place where if you are not pushing back on this kind of thing, you are handing over this kind of power to a government that fully intends to tear down the systems that we are all trying to climb on each other to get a piece of.
And I don't think you even need the historical lens here, because we have examples now in this country in the last 2 years of institutions that have folded and the opinion that folks have of those institutions, and the institutions that have fought back and what the outcomes were. Do you think Columbia got any kind of reprieve for showing their belly back in whatever it was, May of last year? No, they've continually targeted. Their president got ousted, right? Like they have not covered themselves in glory. Trump administration went after a bunch of very, very high-powered law firms. Many of them rolled over. Some of them fought back. The ones that fought back, they won court cases. Right? They're able to maintain their independence. But the other ones, were they rewarded? Well, I actually don't know because I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think so. I can tell you that Harvard has not always covered itself in glory in these kinds of situations, but in this particular case, they fought back and they have won a bunch of court cases.
Hmm.
The American Association of University Professors, AAUP, has been doing a ton of really amazing work. Um, I can tell you that I signed up to join because of the work that they've been doing, and I'm proud of that
Yeah.
institution, right?
Yeah,
So,
and actually, we should link to them in the show notes in case other people want to join because
yeah.
that is an institution. They actually are why we have tenure. That tenure system really was pushed by that. They have a long history of being on the right side of these kinds of conversations. So yeah, would encourage you all to join.
So go write a comment. Uh, don't just fill out a form letter because apparently, if your comment is sort of identical to other comments, it will only count as a single comment. So it's kind of a waste of time. Um, I've written a comment. I've submitted it. I don't want to say any individual person like what they should do, but I think if you if you want to look back at this time in 10 years, 30 years, however long, uh, I think that you're going to want to be proud of the thing that you did and not that you were trying to be, you're not, that you didn't foreground your self-preservation,
Yep. Nope. I
which is,
think that
which is
that's where we
it's
are.
a hard choice to make because, like we all have responsibilities, I have kids. Um, I have another 20, 30 years of work in me, and I've like fought very hard and for a long time to get the position that I have now, and I've only just started a year ago, and it would suck to lose it. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think if we're not, I forget if you said this before we started recording or during, but I think you're right when you said that if you're not fighting back now, you're complicit.
Yeah. No, we're unfortunately at that place, and I think certainly at the institutional level, that's true. If you're looking around at your institution and not seeing any kind of public pushback, they know what's going on. We're now in a place where universities are becoming complicit with this march towards total control over speech in academic spaces, which is the ultimate goal of all of this. At the end of the day, the control point is, can we prevent people from speaking out in academic spaces with authority? And so here we are.
Here we are. And the
So here
title of
we
the
are.
paper that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, I was thinking about just briefly mentioning it. I don't think we can do any kind of justice to it.
I
There's
don't
a
think that
cool
I think we should
paper.
come back to it.
Yeah,
I would like to
I think
record
we
on.
should too.
We had picked a paper 3 weeks ago, and then we've been trying to find a time to record. Things have been busy. But the title of the paper that we were going to discuss today was Gut Microbiota Promotes Immune Tolerance at the Maternal Fetal Interface. And I'll give you two guesses as to which host chose this paper. The last author is Melody Zhang, and the first author was Julia Brown. I didn't actually look to see if there were authors contributed equally. Yeah, so there's two co-first authors, also Mohammed Amir, and it's a very cool paper. I think we should
It
discuss
is.
it.
Yeah,
Um,
we can, but
Alternatively,
also you mentioned the pigeon homing
we
thing, which
may
I think
also
is
talk about
wild.
magnetic macrophages in pigeons,
Amazing.
um, which, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think we should record next week. You and I can discuss offline when we do that. But, you know, we love doing this podcast. This is another volunteer opportunity. That we have this. I think of this as part of service or as part of education, right? Like we have a lot of hats that we wear in academia. It is directly or indirectly funded by tax dollars. But you can support it directly if you want. You can go to audioimmunity.substack.com and you can subscribe to the show. The base rate is $5 a month. If you want to pay less, just send us an email, contact@audioimmunity.org, and we will send you a discount code that you can use forever for whatever amount that you want to pay. I think that our subscribers probably got charged in the month of June or in the month of May, even though we didn't put it on the episodes. I need to look into if we can sort of like give a freebie or something. I'm going to work on that. I've got a bunch of stuff to do on the website, but as I said, we've been busy. So the music at the beginning and the end of the show is composed by Rachel Reineck, and we will see you next time, hopefully not in a country that has decided to destroy its own scientific infrastructure.
Yeah, and actually we are going to find out just how seriously the media gag order that we received within the School of Medicine is going to be carried out. So if you don't see me next time...
Or if Matt's in a different office, maybe. We'll see.
We'll find out.
All right. See you next time.
Okay.
Sometimes you get lucky.